Jose, do you truly believe he understands? The voice cut through the crystal ballroom like a polished blade. The father smiled, raised his glass, and gestured to his son beside him, whose hands trembled subtly over the napkin. Understands? He's decoration, my dear. But if you can converse with him using those hand gestures, I'll pay you double your salary. The silence grew heavy. The impeccably apron-clad employee felt the floor vibrate, not from music, from something worse. Before we delve into this story, leave a comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The ballroom of Cedarwood Estate exuded contained. Bohemian crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like tears in golden light onto tables arranged with military precision. Each white tablecloth concealed years of training, waiters who learned to disappear at the clients who mastered the art of a smile devoid of warmth. There, the clinking of dinnerware served as a soundtrack to decisions that were rarely challenged. In the center, a long table divided the space like an invisible border. On one side, those who commanded; on the other, those who served. Above, on a discreet balcony with a panoramic view, an announcement was awaited, scheduled for 2 hours later, a private presentation promising to redefine contracts and careers. Everyone knew, no one questioned. An invisible clock began to tick, 120 minutes until something changed. Inequality was the silent protagonist of that night. Seated next to a man in an Italian suit and silver tie, a young man with vibrant eyes observed every detail with almost painful attention. His fingers rested on the edge of the table, ready to speak, but his mouth remained closed, not by choice. He communicated through gesture, but his father presented him as an ornament. "My son is discreet," entrepreneur Augustus Farias would say to anyone who would listen, smiling with the confidence of who never needed to ask permission. "He doesn't say much, but he's always paying attention." The atmosphere was one of controlled celebration, but an almost mineral tension hung in the air. Waiters trained to disappear, clients trained to applaud, and an impeccably apron-clad employee who carried more than just plates. Her name was Clara, 32 years old, hair pulled back in a tight bun, steady hands holding trays like one holds a shield. She had been working there for 6 months after abandoning her previous career. No one knew why. She never told. The clock continued, 100 minutes. Augustus raised his glass of red wine, watching the liquid swirl against the light. His voice cut through the murmur of side conversation. "To those who build empires without asking permission," restrained laughter echoed through the... His son, Lucas, kept his eyes fixed on his plate. His fingers moved slightly, drawing something in the air that no one saw. Augustus noticed and made a joke. "Look at that. Even my son agrees. He always agrees, right?" Silence is golden, worth more than idle chatter. Some exchanged glances. Others looked away. Clara, standing 3 meters away holding a water pitcher, felt the floor vibrate under her feet. Not from music, from arrogance. She knew that kind of vibration. She had felt it before, in another time, at another table, when her younger brother, John, was still alive, when she still believed that translating worlds was enough to save them. A message vibrated in her apron. Clara checked discreetly. A reminder for tomorrow morning's appointment. A decisive exam. Time was running out in various 80 minutes. The main courses began to arrive. Truffle medallions, sculpted vegetables, accompaniments that looked more like edible architecture. Augustus observed the movement with a critical eye, like someone evaluating merchant. Then he transformed the table into a stage. "Clara!" He raised his voice, pointing with his fork. "Come here for a minute." She approached, maintaining an upright posture, her face neutral. Augustus smiled broadly, turning to the guests. "You know I value inclusion, right? Well, my son here doesn't speak, but he understands everything, or so they say." He laughed to himself. "So I'm going to make a bet. If this young lady can converse with him using those hand gestures, I'll pay her double her salary. If she can't, she serves me for free for the rest of the night." The silence changed density. Clara didn't respond immediately, excused herself, walked to the counter, filled a glass of water, and drank slowly. She assessed her options. She remembered another table, in another time, a brother whose absence taught her to breathe differently. The clock showed 70 minutes. She returned, looked directly at Augustus, and spoke with a firm voice, without hesitation. "I accept, but with one condition. If there is real understanding between your son and me, no further humiliation will proceed, and you will no longer treat anyone here as a piece of decoration. The audience held their breath. Augustus blinked, surprised, but maintained his, "Agreed. Show us what you know." The moral pact. Clara positioned herself beside Lucas. He looked at her with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. She made a simple, universal sign, fingers joined, forming a heart over her chest. "Respect." Lucas smiled discreetly. He returned the gesture with technical precision. The first exchange happened. The ballroom watched in silence. Clara wasted no time. Her hands began to speak with a fluency that surprised even the veteran waiters. She introduced herself, name, age, position. Lucas responded with clear signs, a facial expression that complemented each visual word. He said he liked to read, that he worked in graphic design, that he studied architecture in his free time. Augustus, seated at the head of the table, frowned. The scene was not following the expected script. He interrupted. "Very nice, but I want to see something difficult. Ask him what he thinks of my latest venture, that coastal development." Clara translated the question. Lucas hesitated. His fingers moved slowly, choosing each sign carefully. He responded that he found the project ambitious, but had doubts about its environmental impact. He preferred sustainable construction. Clara translated aloud, word for word. Augustus paled. Some guests whispered among themselves. One of them, an executive from a partner construction company, cleared his throat uncomfortably. He said that. Augustus tried to his tone. "Funny, he never told me." Lucas signed emphatically. Clara translated without hesitation. "He says he tried many times, but you always change the subject." Augustus forced a laugh, banging on the table. All right. Let's make it more complicated. Ask about philosophy. Ask him what he thinks of Nietzsche." The audience expected a stumble. Clara took a deep breath and signed the question. Lit up. He responded with a long, complex sequence, full of nuances. Clara followed, translating abstract concepts with impressive precision. Will to power, eternal recurrence, critique of herd morality. When she finished, Augustus was pale. A female voice emerged from one of the side tables. It was Marina, the sous chef from the kitchen, who had been observing everything from the ballroom door. "I understood some signs." A step forward. "Clara taught me during breaks. What she translated is correct." Another employee, Roderick, raised his hand. "I also learned the basics." "I confirm." A small chorus of validation. Augustus lost his smile. He changed strategy. He called over the supervisor, Paul, a man in a gray suit with a bureaucratic expression. "Paul, is there any rule about prolonged interactions between employees and clients?" Paul consulted a folder. He flipped through old pages until he found what he was looking for. "Yes, there is. Rule from 2018. Prohibits conversations not related to service." Clara asked to see the document. Paul hesitated, but handed it over. She turned to the last page and pointed to a recent addendum, stamped with an official seal. "Here, amendment from March this year. It revokes the old rule and institutes inclusion protocols. Conversations that promote accessibility are encouraged, not prohibited." Paul recoiled. Augustus clenched his fist. "All right, then we'll do something different." He stood up, pointing to the wall clock. 50 minutes from now, I have a presentation upstairs, on the balcony. An important presentation. You will come up with me and prove, in front of people who truly make decisions, that this little story works in the real world. The clock was ticking. 50 minutes. Clara looked at Lucas. He signed a simple, direct question. "Will you give up?" She responded with her hands. "Never." The preparation was silent and tense. Clara asked for 10 minutes to organize supporting materials. Lucas offered help. Together they reviewed technical signs, specific terms, vocabulary that would be necessary for the formal presentation. Augustus watched from a distance, sipping wine in short gulps, calculating his next moves. He didn't expect resistance, he didn't expect competence, and he definitely didn't expect his own son to become the protagonist of his own story. Marina brought fresh water for Clara. Roderick adjusted the lighting on the balcony. The team moved with the discreet efficiency of those who understood that something bigger was at stake. 35 minutes. Clara checked her phone. Another message. This time, it wasn't from the doctor's office. It was an old recording, automatically sent by a reminder app. The voice of a young deaf man recorded years ago. Thanked her. "You gave me words to the wind. Thank you for not giving up." It wasn't John, her brother. It was Daniel, one of the first students she helped as a volunteer interpreter, before becoming a professional, before everything fell apart. Clara closed her eyes. She took a deep breath. She put her phone away. Lucas lightly touched her shoulder. He signed, "Are you okay?" She responded, "Now I am." 20 minutes. The group began to ascend, Augustus in front, walking with long strides, Clara and Lucas right behind, Marina and Roderick carrying projection equipment. Then, the obstacle. The elevator was under maintenance. A yellow sign blocked the entrance. "Stairs," Augustus said without looking back. 3 flights, high steps. Clara felt the fatigue accumulate in her legs. She carried more weight than people imagined. Her body was protesting. Her breath grew short. Security guard noticed her difficulty. He offered to carry the projector, an unlikely ally. "Thank you," Clara murmured. 15 minutes. When they reached the balcony, 5 minutes remained until the scheduled start. Augustus was already positioned, microphone, his practiced smile back on the audience. Executives, investors, fund representatives, people who decided futures with pens and contracts. Augustus began without waiting. "Good evening. I'm here to talk about efficiency, about how the world operates on concrete results, not vague gestures." Clara didn't have a microphone, but she had her hands, and Lucas. She raised her arms. Lucas raised his. The communication began. The skeptical audience watched in silence. Some executives mentally timed the delays between speeches. But Clara shifted the focus. She didn't just translate words, she translated rigor. She introduced technicals, management terms, financial indicators, sustainability concept. Lucas followed, complimenting with facial expression that carried emphasis and nuance. The fluency dismantled prejudice in real time. A man with dark glasses and a blue blazer asked for the floor. It was Mark Ramos, responsible for compliance audit. "Interesting, but I need a formal record. The young man's speech needs to be transcribed, signed, and dated." Clara dictated. Marina, who had come up with the tablet, typed. Lucas confirmed each line with clear gestures. The document took shape. Mark Ramos signed as a witness. "Accepted as valid." Augustus tried to regain control. "Very well. But let's be practical. Public commitments require deadlines, 90 days. If this doesn't become a real protocol in 3 months, we'll disregard it." Clara added a clause dictating for Marina to record. Public commitments must be fulfilled within 90 days, or penalty of open retraction and external audit. Augustus agreed without realizing the trap presentation, but a new countdown began. 90 days for power to learn to listen. The following 3 months transformed Cedarwood Estate into a silent battlefield. Augustus tried to outsource listening. He hired 5 professional interpreters for corporate events, delegated all communication with Lucas to administrative assistants, created bureaucratic protocols that allowed him to avoid direct confrontation. He believed that dignity could be bought, that inclusion was a matter of budget, not posture. He failed. Lucas began to refuse intermediaries. On the 10th day after the presentation, he returned an important document unsigned. The message he attached was clear, in a video with automatic translation. "Dignity is not delegated. I want to speak with my father directly." Internal pressure grew unexpected. Employees began to comment in the hallways. Frequent restaurant clients noticed the change in atmosphere. Some asked about the balcony event. The specialized press in corporate management picked up rumors. A social responsibility blog published a provocative article, "When Accessibility Becomes Performance." Augustus felt the net tighten. Meetings with his legal team became tense. Lawyers warned about reputational risks. The communication department suggested a controlled public retraction, but he resisted. Pride is a prison with invisible bars. On the 20th day, Lucas sent a formal email to the entire board of directors of the business group. The text, revised by Clara and translated with technical precision, exposed a 15-year history of silencing. It did not accuse, it merely documented meetings where he was not consulted on decisions that directly affected him, family events where he was introduced as the special son in a condescending tone, professional opportunities denied without explanation. The email ended with a sentence that echoed through the offices. "Respect is not a favor, it is a right." 2 directors resigned, not because they disagreed with Lucas, but because they agreed and could no longer bear the company's structural hypocrisy. 45 days after the presentation, Augustus returned to the restaurant, not as a client, as a learner. He arrived on a Tuesday at 7 in the evening, without a reservation, without an entourage. He asked to speak with Clara Marina, who greeted him at the entrance. Hesitated. "She's finishing her shift. I'll wait." He waited 40 minutes, seated at a side table, alone, observing the movement of the ballroom. He saw the waiters communicate discreetly, the quick gestures between kitchen and dining room, the invisible dance of service. He realized he had never paid attention. He had always been at the center, demanding attention, never offering. When Clara appeared, still in her apron, Augustus stood up. "I need to learn." His voice was low, without its usual authoritative tone. "I want you to teach me." Clara studied his face. She looked for sincerity in the wrinkles around his eyes, in the hands that trembled slightly on the table. She recognized desperation, but she needed commitment. "I agree to teach, but with condition." She pulled up a chair, sat down, and enumerated on her fingers. "Lar, first, you don't use what you learn to control. You use it to understand. Second, when Lucas speaks, you listen until the end, without interrupting, without reinterpreting, without correcting. Third, you sign a commitment agreement that will be witnessed and registered. If you give up halfway through, you publicly admit that you failed." Augustus swallowed. Was this humiliation, or was it a chance? "I'll sign." The lessons began on Tuesday and Thursday evening. Clara set a rigorous schedule. First week, manual alphabet, numbers, basic greeting. Augustus's large, clumsy hands tried to imitate precise signs. He messed up finger configurations, mixed up movements, forgot the facial expression that accompanied each word. "It's not just the hand," Clara corrected, with calculated patience. "It's the face, the body, the rhythm. Language isn't just gesture. It's present." Lucas attended the sessions from the second. At first, he remained silent, watching his father sweat over the exercise. Then he showed the correct sign, repeated slowly, adjusted his father's finger position with surprising delicacy. There was something of reconciliation in those gestures, something that couldn't be contained in words or even in signs. It was time recovered. It was shared space. In the fourth week, Augustus managed to maintain a 5-minute conversation entirely in signs. The topic, weekend plans. Simple, everyday, mundane, and precisely because of that, revolutionary. Lucas smiled broadly. For the first time in years, father and son were speaking the same language. On the 60th day, an external audit arrived unannounced. 4 professionals from an international consultancy specializing in compliance and accessibility invaded the offices of Augustus's business group. They checked documents, protocols, physical structures. They interviewed employees randomly. They reviewed supplier contracts. They requested training records. The process lasted 3 days. Augustus tried to interfere to offer context, but the auditors were inflexible. "Our methodology does not allow interference from the audited party." On the 3rd day, Mark Ramos, who had witnessed the presentation on the balcony, appeared as an independent consultant hired by the auditors. He brought the document Augustus had signed that night. He read it aloud during the closing meeting. The commitment was clear. 90 days for implementation. We are on day 6. We need to see concrete results, not intention. The preliminary report was released internally. It pointed to progress, hiring of interpreters, initiation of a training program, adjustments to some protocol. But it also pointed to structural failures, lack of accessibility in 3 of the 5 regional headquarters, absence of subtitles in institutional videos, non-existence of adaptive materials for a client. The certification would be provisional, conditioned on the correction of failures within 30 days, maintenance of the inclusion program for a minimum of 2 years. The news leaked to the press. The validation became a head. The change became a case study. Clara received another piece of news that same day, an intimate and silent. The ultrasound exam confirmed healthy pregnancy, 16 weeks, normal development. The doctor smiled as he handed her the report. Mother and baby are doing great. She left the clinic holding the envelope like someone holding a promise. Her future, which seemed too fragile to sustain dreams, found solid ground. She wouldn't have to choose between starting over. She could do both. On the 70th day, Beatrice appeared, an old colleague of Clara's from her professional interpreting days. She brought a structured proposal, expand the project's reach, create formal partnerships with 3 educational institutions, train regional multipliers, develop accessible educational material. "You planted something that can grow far beyond this place," Beatrice said, opening a laptop with present. "You don't have to carry this alone. Let's build." Clara accepted, but she imposed a rule. No project without the active participation of deaf people at all stages. Nothing about them without them. The partial victory, however, generated unexpected internal resistance. Old managers of the group, accustomed to vertical hierarchy and management by intimidation, felt threatened. Some began to subtly sabotage. Implementation meetings were canceled without notice. Approved budgets disappeared in bureaucracy. Memos circulated with technical concerns that were, in reality, ideological objections. A director, Fabian Mendez, a 30-year veteran of the company, called a closed meeting and openly questioned, "Are we turning a company into an NGO? Where's the efficiency?" The phrase leaked. It reached Lucas's ears, who requested the right of reply. He scheduled a meeting with the administrative board. He brought Clara, interpreter. Lucas presented numbers. Companies with robust inclusion policies showed talent retention rates 23% higher. Customer satisfaction rose 17%. Labor lawsuits fell by an average of 31%. He projected graphs, cited studies, dismantled the argument of inefficiency with the language that board understood. Data. Fabian Mendez tried to retort, but he had no ammunition. He remained silent. On the 80th day, Augustus did something no one expected. He convened a general assembly in the very ballroom of Cedarwood Estate. All employees of the group were invited, key suppliers, strategic clients. The press? He ascended the stage where, months earlier, he had tried to turn his son into a spectacle. This time, he ascended to acknowledge his error. "I was wrong." His voice echoed through the sound system. "I treated my son as an ornament. I treated employees as replaceable parts. I built an empire without empathy. That ends today." He announced concrete measures. Read from an official document. Creation of 20 full scholarships for accessibility and inclusion training for interested employees. Adjustment of work schedules to allow for training without loss of salary. Complete rewriting of the company's code of conduct with the participation of a parity committee. Allocation of 3% of annual net profit to a permanent accessibility fund. And something more important, full autonomy for Clara to coordinate a permanent inclusion corps with its own budget, veto power over decisions affecting accessibility, and a direct link to the board without subordination to intermediate directorate. The ballroom fell silent for 3 seconds. Then applause, not out of courtesy, out of recognition, but some applauded differently. Open palms in the air, waved in rhythmic movement. The visual greeting of the deaf community. Clara, seated in the front row beside Lucas, felt her eyes sting. On the 90th day, the ballroom gathered again, not to witness humiliation, to celebrate. The decor had changed. Where crystal chandeliers once hung, there were now discrete banners with QR codes that directed to accessible menus, subtitled institutional videos, basic sign language communication tutorials. On the walls, interactive panels allowed clients to leave messages in text, audio, or video in ASL. The restaurant remained elegant, but now it was truly welcoming. Augustus and Lucas ascended the stage together. Sign and voice walked side by side. Augustus began speaking into the microphone, but this time he waited. After each sentence, he paused. Lucas signed. Clara, beside them, translated so that everyone understood his son's response before the father. It was no longer a monologue. It was a dialogue. "I learned that power without listening is fragility disguised as strength," Augustus. And for the first time in months, his voice carried something beyond command. It carried learning. Lucas signed his response with broad, expressive movements. Clara translated, "I learned that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. It means building differently. It means choosing the future without erasing the past." The audience now included representatives from 5 educational institutions, 3 human rights organizations, managers from 8 partner companies who had expressed interest in replicating the program, and a film crew for a documentary on corporate transformation. A partnership agreement was signed right there, in front of everyone. It wasn't just symbolic. It established measurable goals, auditable timeline, reversal clauses in case commitments were not met. Mark Ramos, now officially hired as a permanent auditor, signed as a witness and overseer. The gain transcended the individual. In the following weeks, workers from various areas of the business group began to receive basic visual communication training. Not just those who dealt directly with the public, but everyone, from the board to maintenance. The reasoning was simple. Communication is a shared responsibility, Marina led a silent revolution in the kitchen. She created a fully accessible menu, descriptions in Braille embossed on special QR codes on each table that directed to videos with detailed descriptions of dishes in ASL and audio descriptions for blind people. Clear allergen indications with universal pictograms. The menu became a case study. Other restaurants in the region began to seek Marina for a consultation. Roderick set up an inclusive service system that became a model. Tablets at the tables allowed clients to choose their preferred form of interaction: text, audio, video call with a remote interpreter, or direct call to a trained ASL proficient service professional. The system was licensed to a national restaurant chain. Clients with different needs began to frequent Cedarwood Estate, not out of charity, but out of quality. The restaurant became a benchmark. Reservations increased. Revenue went up. The transformation proved what denied. Inclusion is good business. Clara, 6 months pregnant, coordinated the Inclusion Corps with a firm hand and an open heart. She hired a team of 5 people, 3 of whom were deaf. She established a clear protocol. All core meetings were held in ASL, with translation into English when necessary, not the other way around. Sign language was not a guest, it was the host. Beatrice led the pedagogical expansion. In 4 months, she trained 120 multipliers in 6 cities. The educational material developed in partnership with universities was made available free of charge under an open license. Public schools began to adopt it. Lucas ceased to be decoration, became an accessibility consultant, paid above market average, respected at corporate events, listened to in strategic decisions. 3 companies tried to hire him with aggressive proposals. He refused them all. "My work here is not finished," explained in a public video. "Real transformation takes time. I'm staying." And Augustus? He continued learning. He didn't become a hero. He wasn't canonized. He became someone capable of recognizing that an empire built without empathy crumbles from within, no matter how much profit it generates. He began to frequent, on his own initiative, meetings of the local deaf community. At first, he was met with distrust. Over time, he earned respect, not for what he promised, but for what he did. He paid out of his own pocket for the renovation of a community center. He financed scholarships. He attended graduations. He learned the difference between charity and justice. On a quiet April afternoon, 6 months after the 90-day deadline had been met and validated, Clara sat on the balcony that had once served as a stage for defiance. Her bulging belly rested on her lap. Beside her, a cardboard box held old objects, yellowed photos of John, dusty course certificates, the aged interpreter's badge she hadn't worn in years. She had started wearing the badge again, not around her neck, but in her heart. Now she understood that stopping hadn't been weakness. It had been survival. And starting over wasn't a betrayal of pain. It was an honor to memory. Lucas approached with silent steps. He sat beside her. He signed a question he had been holding for weeks. Why did you stop being an interpreter? What happened? Clara took a deep breath. She looked at the horizon where the sun was beginning to set. She responded in a low voice, accompanied by slow spas, almost ritualistic gesture. "Because I lost my brother. John was deaf. I was his bridge to the world. But one day the bridge wasn't enough. He was in a medical emergency. I wasn't there. The hospital didn't have an on-call interpreter. He tried to communicate. No one understood. By the time they did, it was too late." She paused. Her hands trembled. She continued, "I carried guilt. I thought I had failed to translate him to the world. I stopped because I couldn't bear the idea of failing again." Lucas waited. He didn't interrupt. Clara continued, "But today I understand differently. I don't just translate words. I translate dignity. And dignity never fails. If I don't give up. John didn't die because I failed. He died because the system failed. And changing the system isn't one person's job. It's everyone's commitment." Lucas hugged her. A long embrace. Without just. They stayed like that for minutes. The afternoon cooled. The sun painted the sky orange and purple. When they parted, Lucas signed something new. "Are you going to name the baby?" Clara smiled. "I haven't decided yet, but I know it will be a name that means new beginnings." The support network consolidated with surprising strength. In 6 months, over 400 volunteers signed up. The open classes held on the balcony every Wednesday evening began to fill up. Entire families attended. parents learning to communicate with children, children learning to communicate with parents, friends learning to include friends. Cedarwood Estate became a meeting point, not just for the elite, for the community. Business contracts began to be translated before being signed. Strategic decisions were given pause to ensure everyone understood. Meetings that once lasted an hour now lasted 90 minutes, but the quality of decisions visibly improved. Less noise, more clarity. The clock, which had once constricted throats with an agonizing countdown, now marked gatherings. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m., open class. Every Friday at 8 p.m., discussions. Every last Saturday of the month, community celebration with cultural presentation. No one needed to ask for silence when it was respect, and when it was oppression, it was broken without fear. The legacy did not belong to one person. It belonged to a community that learned to win without crushing, to grow without excluding, to profit without exploiting. Clara gave birth at the end of June, a girl. Name chosen, Hope. Lucas was the first to visit her at maternity ward. He brought a gift wrapped in colorful paper. Inside, a handmade crib mold with small wooden hands sculpted into the sign for love. So she grows up knowing that communication is a gesture of love, he explained in sign. Clara cried. She hugged the gift. She hugged Lucas. Augustus arrived next, shyly, asking if he could enter. He brought flowers and an envelope. Inside, an educational trust fund in Hope's name, guaranteeing full education until university. It's not a favor, it's reparation and commitment. Clara accepted. 6 months later, Cedarwood Estates Inclusion Corps was officially recognized as a public benefit organization. It received awards. It became an international benchmark. But the most important thing wasn't in the trophies. It was at the ballroom tables, where deaf and hearing clients conversed without barriers. It was in the kitchens, where recipes were exchanged in multiple. It was in the hallway, where employees greeted signs learned coffee. Power that humiliates is fragile. Power that listens is enduring. And shared dignity is not it is a foundation. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share in the comments. What was the moment that moved you the most? What city or country are you joining us? Your voice matters as much as that of every character in this story. Together, we build a space where no story is left behind, where no voice is silenced, where respect is not an exception, but the rule. Until the next narrative,